The silence in the public library's research section was so complete at 8:30 on a Thursday evening that I could hear my own heartbeat echoing in my ears as I sat alone among the towering stacks of books, trying to focus on my graduate research while fighting the growing sensation that I was being watched by someone hidden in the maze of shelves surrounding my study table. I had been using this particular branch of the city library system for over 2 years to conduct research for my master's thesis, taking advantage of the quiet evening hours when the building was nearly empty and I could work without the distractions of daytime crowds. The library had always been my sanctuary, a place where knowledge and learning created an atmosphere of safety and intellectual pursuit that made me feel protected and inspired, even during the most stressful periods of my graduate studies. But tonight was different. Tonight, the familiar comfort of books and scholarly resources had been replaced by an oppressive atmosphere that made every shadow between the stacks seem threatening, and every small sound echo with sinister implications. I could feel eyes watching me from somewhere in the darkness beyond the reading area's limited lighting. And I had the disturbing sense that someone was moving through the stacks with deliberate stealth, positioning themselves to observe my activities while remaining hidden from view. My name is Rebecca, and that night taught me that public libraries aren't just sanctuaries for learning. They're hunting grounds where predators use the quiet isolation, maze-like layouts, and public accessibility of these institutions to identify and stalk victims who are focused on reading and research activities, trusting that their pursuit of knowledge will remain safe and peaceful. Ever wondered why some people suddenly stop using certain library sections after dark? Ever questioned why certain patrons seem paranoid about being alone in the stacks? Share this video if you felt uncomfortable while studying alone in library stacks and sensed that someone was watching you from between the shelves with intentions that had nothing to do with books or learning. Because tonight, I'm sharing 3 true accounts that will make you question every assumption you've made about library safety. These aren't exaggerated stories or urban legends designed to make people afraid of libraries. These are real experiences from real patrons who learned that when you use public libraries during off-peak hours or in isolated sections of large buildings, you can encounter people whose intentions have nothing to do with books or learning and everything to do with exploiting the trust and vulnerability of library users. Amanda Foster was a 24-year-old journalism student who regularly used the main branch of the Portland Public Library system to conduct research for her investigative reporting projects and to access specialized databases and archives that were not available through her university's library system. Amanda had been using the public library for over 3 years and had developed efficient research routines that took advantage of the facility's extensive collections. Amanda's preferred research location was the library's 4th-floor reference section, which housed specialized collections and provided quiet study spaces that were ideal for the concentrated work required by her journalism projects. The 4th floor was typically less crowded than the main reading areas and offered the kind of scholarly atmosphere that Amanda needed for complex investigative work. Amanda's library routine typically involved evening visits when the building was quieter, and she could access research materials without competing with other students or dealing with the distractions that made daytime library use challenging for intensive academic work. Amanda had established a comfortable pattern of library use and had developed friendly relationships with the reference librarians. But during the second week of November 2022, Amanda began to notice that she was being watched during her library visits by a man who appeared to be conducting surveillance of her research activities rather than pursuing his own legitimate library business. The man would position himself in areas where he could observe Amanda's work while pretending to browse books or use computer terminals. Amanda's concern about the watching individual escalated when she realized that the man was following her movements through different areas of the library, tracking her from the reference section to the periodicals area to the computer labs in ways that suggested systematic surveillance rather than coincidental presence in the same library spaces. Comment below if you've ever noticed someone following you through different sections of a library while pretending to browse books. because what Amanda discovered about this stalker's tactics proved that some predators use the maze-like layouts and quiet atmosphere of libraries to conduct systematic surveillance of victims who are focused on academic work and less aware of potential threats. The surveillance behavior became more obvious and threatening when the man began to approach Amanda more directly, initially making casual comments about her research topics, but gradually becoming more personal and intrusive in his questions about her academic work, her schedule, and her personal life. The man's escalation from passive observation to direct contact represented a significant increase in threat level. Amanda's investigation of the man's activities revealed that he was not a legitimate library patron, but was using the public library as a hunting ground to identify and stalk female students who appeared vulnerable due to their focus on academic work and their predictable study routines. The man had been conducting systematic surveillance of multiple women who used the library for research. The situation became more disturbing when Amanda discovered that the man had been gathering information about her personal life, including her university affiliation, her class schedule, and her living situation. By observing her research materials and overhearing her phone conversations during library visits, the man's intelligence-gathering activities suggested planning for harassment or assault. Amanda's attempts to avoid the stalker by varying her library schedule and using different study areas were unsuccessful, as the man seemed to be conducting comprehensive surveillance of her activities and was able to locate her regardless of when or where she chose to conduct her research. The stalker's persistence indicated experience with stalking behavior. The situation reached a crisis point when the man began to leave notes and gifts for Amanda in the library stacks, using his knowledge of her research areas and study habits to place items where she would find them during her academic work. The notes contained personal information that the stalker could only have obtained through extensive surveillance. Amanda realized that she was dealing with a sophisticated stalker who was using the library's public access and quiet atmosphere to conduct harassment activities that could escalate to assault or kidnapping if she didn't take immediate action. The stalker's knowledge of her academic work and personal life created serious risks to her safety. Amanda's response to the stalking situation required her to work with library security, university officials, and local law enforcement to document the harassment and implement protection measures. Amanda's cooperation with the investigation led to the stalker's identification and arrest, revealing that he had been targeting multiple female library patrons. The investigation revealed that the stalker had been operating in multiple library branches throughout the Portland area, using his knowledge of library layouts and patron patterns to conduct surveillance and harassment activities that had affected dozens of women who used public libraries for legitimate educational purposes. Amanda's experience taught her that public libraries could expose patrons to stalking and harassment from predators who used the quiet atmosphere and public accessibility of these institutions to identify and pursue victims who were focused on academic work. But if you think individual stalkers represent the most dangerous threat that library patrons can face, wait until you hear what happened to Michael in Boston. Because sometimes the most terrifying library experiences involve discovering that secure areas of these trusted institutions are being used as bases for criminal operations that put innocent researchers at risk of exposure to dangerous illegal activities and violent confrontations with criminals who view witnesses as threats to be eliminated. Michael Chen was a 32-year-old historian who regularly used the research facilities at the Boston Public Library's Central Branch to access historical documents and archival materials for his doctoral dissertation on 19th-century American labor movements. Michael's research required extensive use of the library's special collections and basement archives, which housed rare documents and historical materials. The basement archives at the Boston Public Library were located in a secure area beneath the main building, with restricted access that required special permission and supervision from library staff who were trained in handling rare and valuable historical materials. Michael had been granted research privileges that allowed him to work in the basement archives during evening hours, Michael's research routine typically involved scheduled appointments during evening hours when he could work with archival materials without the time constraints and distractions that made daytime research sessions less productive. Michael appreciated the quiet, scholarly atmosphere of the basement archives and the opportunity to work directly with historical documents. But during the third week of September 2021, Michael began to notice unusual activities in the basement archives that suggested the presence of people who were not legitimate researchers or library staff and who appeared to be conducting activities that had nothing to do with historical research or archival work. Michael's investigation of the unusual activities revealed that sections of the basement archives were being used for purposes that had nothing to do with library operations and appeared to involve illegal activities that took advantage of the secure location and limited oversight during evening hours when few staff members and researchers were present. Subscribe and turn on notifications if you've ever discovered suspicious activities in restricted areas of a library. Because what Michael found in the Boston Public Library's basement proved that some criminal organizations used the secure locations and scholarly reputation of libraries to conceal illegal operations that put innocent researchers at risk of exposure to dangerous criminal activities. The situation became more concerning when Michael realized that the illegal activities in the basement involved document forgery, identity theft, and other criminal enterprises that exploited the library as reputation for scholarly research and document preservation to conceal illegal operations that generated significant revenue while avoiding detection. Michael's discovery of the criminal activities put him in immediate danger as the people operating the illegal enterprises became aware of his presence and began to view him as a potential threat to their operations. Michael was confronted by individuals who made it clear that his knowledge of their activities was unwelcome. The criminal operators had been exploiting the library's basement archives for several months, using their knowledge of the facility's layout and security procedures to establish illegal operations that took advantage of the restricted access and limited oversight that characterized the special collections environment. Michael's attempts to escape from the dangerous situation and report the criminal activities were complicated by the criminals' control of the basement facility and their ability to monitor and restrict access to the exits and communication equipment. The situation escalated when Michael discovered that the criminal activities involved the production of forged historical documents and the theft of genuine archival materials that were being sold to private collectors and institutions that were unaware of their illegal origins. The criminals' exploitation of the library's historical collections represented a serious threat. Michael's escape from the dangerous situation required him to use his knowledge of the library's layout and his understanding of the criminals' operational patterns to avoid detection while reaching a location where he could contact law enforcement for assistance. Michael ultimately managed to contact law enforcement and provide detailed information about the criminal activities, leading to a major investigation that exposed the illegal operations and resulted in multiple arrests of people who had been using the library's basement archives as a base for document forgery and theft. The investigation revealed that the criminal organization had been operating in the basement for over 8 months, using the legitimate library operations to conceal their illegal activities while putting legitimate researchers and library staff at risk of harm or legal consequences. Michael's experience taught him that library basement areas and special collections facilities could be vulnerable to infiltration by criminal organizations that used the secure locations and limited oversight to conduct illegal activities that put innocent researchers and valuable cultural materials at risk. But even criminal organizations using library basements as operational bases seem manageable compared to what happened to Lisa in Denver. Because sometimes the most insidious threats that library patrons face involve predators who specifically target people who work with children, using the educational atmosphere and children's sections of libraries to identify victims whose professional responsibilities make them particularly vulnerable to threats that extend to the children in their care. Lisa Rodriguez was a 28-year-old elementary school teacher who regularly used the Denver Public Library's main branch to research educational materials and children's literature for her classroom activities and lesson planning. Lisa's work required her to spend significant time in the library's children's section, reviewing books and educational resources. The children's section at the Denver Public Library was designed to be a welcoming, safe environment for families and educators who needed access to age-appropriate books and educational materials. The section featured comfortable reading areas, interactive displays, and specialized collections that made it an ideal location for teachers. Lisa's library routine typically involved visits during evening hours when the children's section was less crowded and she could review materials without the distractions of busy family activities, and children's programs that made daytime visits challenging for focused educational planning. But during the first week of October 2023, Lisa began to notice that she was being watched during her library visits by a man who appeared to be conducting surveillance of her activities in the children's section rather than pursuing any legitimate library business related to children's literature or educational materials. Lisa's concern about the watching individual escalated when she realized that the man was not actually interested in children's books or educational materials, but was using the children's section as a location to observe and potentially approach women who worked with children or who appeared to be involved in educational activities. Hit that like button if you work with children and have ever felt uncomfortable about someone watching you in library children's sections. Because what Lisa discovered about this predator's tactics proved that some criminals specifically target educators and childcare workers using the educational atmosphere of libraries to identify victims whose professional responsibilities make them particularly vulnerable to threats. The surveillance behavior became more disturbing when Lisa observed the man taking photographs of her and other women who used the children's section, apparently documenting their appearances and activities for purposes that had nothing to do with legitimate library use or educational research. Lisa's investigation of the man's activities revealed that he was not a legitimate library patron with educational interests, but was using the children's section as a hunting ground to identify women who worked in educational or childcare fields and who might be vulnerable to predators who specifically targeted people involved in child-related professions. The situation became more threatening when the man began to approach Lisa directly, initially making casual comments about children's books and educational materials, but gradually becoming more personal and intrusive in his questions about her work with children, her school location, and her daily routines. Lisa realized that the man's interest in her work with children was not educational, but was related to predatory behavior that specifically targeted women who worked in educational fields. The man's questions about her school and her students suggested that his intentions might involve threats to children as well as to Lisa herself. The situation escalated when Lisa discovered that the man had been gathering information about her school and her students by following her from the library and conducting surveillance of her workplace and her classroom activities. The man's expansion of his surveillance beyond the library environment indicated planning for harassment or assault. Lisa's attempts to avoid the predator by varying her library schedule and using different research areas were unsuccessful, as the man seemed to be conducting comprehensive surveillance of her activities and was able to locate her regardless of when or where she chose to conduct her educational research. The situation reached a crisis point when the man began to make threats against Lisa's students and her school, making it clear that his predatory behavior was not limited to Lisa herself, but extended to the children in her care and the educational environment where she worked. Lisa realized that she was dealing with a predator who specifically targeted women who worked with children and who was using the library's children's section as a hunting ground to identify potential victims in educational and childcare fields. The predator's threats against children created serious risks to child safety. Lisa's response to the predatory behavior required her to work with library security, school administration, and law enforcement to document the threats and implement protection measures that would ensure the safety of both Lisa and her students. Lisa's cooperation with the investigation led to the predator's identification and arrest, revealing that he had been targeting multiple women who worked with children and had been using public libraries as hunting grounds for identifying potential victims whose professional responsibilities made them particularly vulnerable. Lisa's experience taught her that library children sections could expose educators and child care workers to predators who specifically targeted women who worked with children and who used the educational atmosphere of libraries to identify and pursue victims. These three accounts from public library patrons across America reveal a disturbing truth about these institutions that we trust as safe havens for learning and community gathering. Public libraries can become hunting grounds for predators who use the quiet isolation, maze-like layouts, and public accessibility of these facilities to identify and stalk victims who are focused on reading, research, and educational activities. Amanda's encounter with a systematic stalker in Portland's reference section proved that some predators use the maze-like layouts and quiet atmosphere of libraries to conduct systematic surveillance of victims who are focused on academic work and less aware of potential threats. Michael's discovery of criminal operations in Boston's basement archives demonstrated that some criminal organizations use the secure locations and scholarly reputation of libraries to conceal illegal operations that put innocent researchers at risk. Lisa's experience with a predator targeting educators in Denver's children's section revealed that some criminals specifically target people who work with children using the educational atmosphere of libraries to identify victims whose professional responsibilities make them particularly vulnerable to threats that extend to the children in their care. The most chilling aspect of these accounts isn't just the individual dangers themselves, it's the realization that these threats specifically exploit the trust, accessibility, and scholarly atmosphere that make libraries valuable community resources, turning these sanctuaries of knowledge into environments where predators can identify and attack victims who assume their pursuit of learning will remain safe. Amanda had no warning that her investigative journalism research would attract the attention of a stalker who used library layouts and academic environments to conduct systematic surveillance of female students. Michael had no indication that his historical research would expose him to criminal organizations using library basements as operational bases for document forgery and theft. Lisa had no clue that her educational research would make her a target for predators who specifically hunted women who worked with children, using children's sections as hunting grounds for identifying victims whose professional responsibilities made them particularly vulnerable. If you're currently using public libraries, especially during evening hours or in isolated sections of large buildings, if you've noticed suspicious behavior from other patrons, or if you felt uncomfortable while studying alone in library stacks, trust your instincts and remember that maintaining awareness could be the difference between a productive research session and a dangerous encounter. Ring that notification bell if these stories have made you more conscious of library safety, and remember that understanding these risks and warning signs could help you avoid becoming a victim of predators who use the accessibility and quiet atmosphere of public libraries to identify and attack patrons. The next time you're using a public library, especially during evening hours or in isolated sections of the building, remember these stories and maintain awareness of your surroundings, other patrons and individuals whose behavior seems inappropriate for an educational environment. Sometimes the most dangerous part of pursuing knowledge is not the complexity of research or the challenge of academic work. It's the moment when you realize that someone has been watching you from the shadows between the book stacks, studying your routines, and planning to use your dedication to learning as an opportunity to harm you. Before you go, check out the playlist in the description for more true library horror stories that could save your life. Because in the end, the most important thing you can check out from any library is your own safety. And no research project or study session is worth risking your security in situations where predators use educational environments to identify and attack victims. Comment below if these stories have changed how you think about library safety, and remember that the best library experience is one that expands your knowledge and gets you home safely, even if it means staying alert, trusting your instincts, and prioritizing your safety over convenience or routine study habits. Stay safe out there. And remember that libraries should remain sanctuaries for learning and intellectual growth, not hunting grounds for predators who exploit the trust and accessibility that make public education possible.